So let's suppose you don't play piano, but you play some other instrument. Let's say a string instrument. Now, it could be guitar, it could be violin, it could be, and then any version of these, you know, like bass guitar, or ukulele, or from this one it could be like cello, or viola, that kind of thing. It doesn't really matter what you play, right? String instruments kind of all work the same way. Again, remember from the piano, let's go over this really quick with the review. We had this set up before where you had 2 and then 3, and then an extra 1, and then this was drawn like this, much like this, and then this was C, this is D, this is E, F, G, A, B, C. This should be kind of simple if you have been practicing. Remember, this is C sharp or D flat. This is D sharp. Now let's get different colors for the flats. Let me do sharps really quick. D sharp, E sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and then finally B sharp, right? And then for flats, we can go back and do this. This will be D flat, this will be E flat, this will be F flat, G flat, A flat is up here, B flat is right here, and finally we have C flat, okay? So we have these notes. Now, you could argue, this is also B sharp down here. Let me get sharp color, B, oops. There we go, B sharp. You could argue, well, you know, C and B sharp are the same thing, and these are called pitch classes. Pitch classes. Oops, P-I-T. I can't spell anymore, guys. I'm sorry. Please bear with me. Pitch classes. And so we have C and B sharp as one pitch class. We have C sharp. Let me get a different color for these. C sharp and D flat. This is another pitch class. You can see they're the same note up here, right? So they're the same pitch class right there. D, we don't have any other names for this one at the moment, so it's its own pitch class. Next we have D sharp and E flat. Then we have E, let me keep changing colors before this gets too crazy. E and F flat. We got E sharp and F. And this continues, of course. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 pitch classes. Remember, this one is the same as this one over here, so it's the same thing. We have 12 different pitch classes, right? 12 pitch classes. So this is important if you want to move on to other instruments where you say, well, how do I play a C sharp, and then how do I play a D flat? But it's kind of safe to assume, you know, like C sharp and D flat are kind of the same thing. In fact, you can probably do this: C sharp equals D flat, and this is true for most cases. So they sound the same. There's a spelling difference, similar how two and two sound the same, but they are used differently, right? So sometimes you need to say, oh, it's going to be a C sharp, or sometimes it's going to be a D flat. But that's usually in writing. In playing, you would play these pretty much the same way, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Now, if you play a string instrument, like we were talking about before, you can take any string, and depending on the instrument you're going to start on, it's divided up into segments, depending on where you put your finger along the line here. Okay. So, for example, on a guitar, the lowest string is E. I think most string instruments have an E string anyway, or probably not, but it doesn't really matter. Whatever you do, you're starting with one pitch class, and the pitch classes do come in order. So if this is pitch class number 1, this is pitch class 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you keep going. When you hit number 12, the next one would be 1, and then you'd go 2, 3, 4, etc. And just keep going around and around, because music repeats forever. Right? So you'll eventually, on the string instrument, get back to where you started. So this will be E, but it will be an octave higher. This could be E, or let's do this. This will be, maybe if this is E1, this would be E2. So you can look on the keyboard and say this is C1, and this is C2, right? Okay, so depending on where you put your finger on a string instrument, it works the same way. You have all these different little segments between, and I'm not spacing this out properly, so let's try to do this. If this is the halfway point, maybe it goes a little bit like this. And you just divide. This might not work, guys. Bear with me if it doesn't. But you get the idea, at least. So this, if you put your finger here, this would be where E is. If you put your finger here, this will give you the next note. So this will be, after E is F, right? After E is F, or E sharp, whatever you want to call it. So this is going to be F. The next one would be, give you a second to think about it. That's correct, F sharp. The next one would be G. The next one would be G sharp. And then A, and then A sharp. And then B sharp, or C. We can just write C, right? C sharp, D, D sharp, and look at that moment of truth. It brings us back to E. Okay, so we have all 12 notes here too, just on a string. So your guitar might look something like this, where you have another string here and another string here, and you keep having more strings. They're all tuned differently. So the bottom one on a guitar anyway is E here. Then you would have A, and then you'd have D, and then you have 3 more strings. So the tuning on a guitar, let's do this. Guitar is E, A. Let me give myself a little bit more room. Let's just go horizontal here. E, A, D, G, B, and then another E. Sometimes it's written as a lowercase e because it's higher than that E, so you can tell them apart. A bass guitar, if you're learning bass, is the same 4 as this one, so you just do E, A, D, and G. A ukulele is a little strange because it's completely different. You would go G, C, E, and A. The weird part is this G, even though it's the bottom string on the instrument, it actually goes here in pitch. So the C here is the lowest one. In guitar and bass, the lowest E is here. This is lowest, and then it goes up like this. But really on a uke, it kind of looks like this. C, E, and A, like that. So this is your lowest string, even though it's not the bottommost or the leftmost string. It's a little strange. Violin, cello, and viola are all tuned differently, of course. So if you're learning all those instruments, you would have to learn what the strings are. The other difference between guitars and basses and ukes from the more classical ones, violin, cello, and viola, and string bass. We can put string bass or upright bass, the classic bass, the refined bass rather than the cool or groovy one, right? The main difference is that guitars have something called frets that you can put your finger into. There's a metal piece that is here. Maybe gray is good for metal. You have a metal thing here that you can put your finger in, and in between the metal pieces here. And then if you put your finger here, you will get the note you want. On a violin, or a classic instrument, it's not the case. You just put your finger here and you have nothing to tell you why. So it's a lot of muscle memory, a lot of practice, and you got to use your ear a little bit more. It's a little bit more tricky. But with practice, it's totally easy and not too difficult once you get the hang of it. Just a little bit daunting maybe, because on a guitar, you just put your finger there and it makes a beautiful sound. On a violin, it's a little bit more guessing until you're well practiced in it. Okay, so that's how the notes are on string instruments. All you do is take your starting thing, you figure out, oh, maybe this is an A, depending on the instrument you're playing or the string you're talking about, and then you just, every single time you move your finger up, you're getting a new letter. This would be A sharp then, this would be B, this would be C, C sharp, and it just keeps going up, and D, E, I didn't count this time, of course, oops, I missed one, D sharp, E, I didn't count, so I'll have to add more and pretend that I did it correctly, so this is going to be F sharp, G, G sharp, and finally A. Okay. The interesting thing, I'm not drawing this to scale or anything, but the interesting thing, let me scroll down and get a little bit more room. The interesting thing about this is if you have a string, the difference between a note is kind of like this. I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, but hopefully you can get the idea, where they become closer and closer together like this as you go up. And the reason has to do with ratios and stuff. I guess the lines could be the same length or whatever, but it gets, and eventually, if you got high enough, it would eventually turn into this. Meanwhile, every single step is, like if this is C sharp, this is D sharp, that kind of thing. And it keeps getting up and up and up. And that's based on how physics works. So if you are playing violin, the difference between a low note on a string versus the next note here is much bigger difference than from like a higher note here to here. The distance is much smaller. And that's true on a guitar too. Your frets would look the same thing, where you have they would get a little bit smaller, especially as you get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And eventually you don't play up here, you just play the rest of the string down here. And that's it. There you go.